Bien. Bien, vamos a continuar entonces con la
now we are going to continue with the last session today. Those of you who are in the back of the room, please come forward or at least stay quiet so that we can continue working. The last session today is the panel on the regional energy perspectives. First of all, I'm inviting keynote speaker Jaime Siguetti, who is the partner of McKinsey & Company, who is going to tell us more about this topic.
Bien.
Okay.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Bien.
So, the idea was to share a study that we are doing as a McKinsey at the global and regional level regarding the energy. We are going to talk about three topics: global view of what is happening, then regional view, and then we are going to tell you how the investment flow is moving. And so when we look globally, we have four big messages here that we need to consider. First of all, I think it's not going to be a surprise for anyone. The world is not moving in the direction of getting 1.5 degrees Celsius of increase of temperature. The second, the energy demand is going to grow, and we need more energy. 3, fossil fuels are still going to be more relevant in this medium term than what we thought, but with the difference of the type of the fuel, but there's not going to be a transition as we thought globally. And 4, the pace of renewable low carbon energy is not enough to achieve our objectives. We think that nuclear energy could also play a significant role, but there are some challenges. So this is what happens is that it shows us how we can see the emissions that to reach 1.5 degrees and what are the more realistic objectives. Basically, in any of the scenario that we see possible, we are 20 to 60% above what we planned. So we are not doing enough as community to reach these aspirations. On top of that, as I said, depending of the speed of the transition, the electricity is going to also depend. It's going to reach higher uptake of electrification, and I like this graph because it tells us more joules, more energy that we need. So we get this better illustrated here. And the world, as we said, is going to be more conservative, so we are going to maintain more traditional fuel need. And in this photo of the traditional fuels, it depends on which fuel are we using. Natural gas is going to stay with the relevant role because it also needs to stabilize a more renewable energy, but oil and coal should lose their possibility, their importance. So it depends which fossil fuel are we talking about. And finally, the global consumption, where does the increase of the energy come from? So as we are getting everything more electrified, we are going to use less energy, but also data centers are going to play a more important role. About 10% of the global need for the energy in 2050 is going to be due to the data centers, and the transport Even though it's not too complex for the matrix, it's going to get more and more important when we electrify more transport means of transport. So globally, what we can see the energy. We can see that we are not making progress toward the 1.5 degrees, and we are going to have higher consumption in different areas, especially in data centers in the United States of America and China. So if we look at Latin American perspective, because we talked about global perspective, in LATAM, the demand and the production are similar because we are moving and our new synthetic and hydrogen fuels is supposed to be higher production, and the installed capacity, we can see that in the future we are going to duplicate our double our installed capacity, and by 2050 80% of the capacity is going to be residual, and the batteries together with the solar energy have reached what they were going to consider useful and cost-effective. And regarding generation, similar to the previously mentioned, in generation we have to consider that in gas continues having the important role, but the are going to get about 85% as their generation cost lowers. This is, of course, at the grid level, construction and capex level when they get into the market. And because of that, we wanted to get this view of how we can see the investment flow. And what is happening? First of all, this even there we see many things in the news. World is really interconnected, and here we can see how each region of the world exports or imports different elements. In Latin America, we import netto everything that is electronics, pharmaceuticals, but we export energy and export raw materials. So our role would be to reach the prominence, but no part of the world can exist on its own because we are going to continue being interconnected. But here where are we moving the capital? Where do we move the capital? And everything that happened between 2022 and 2025, last 3 years, the capital is moving to the industries of the future, energies, metals, and everything that is advanced infrastructure. And all of that is there, so with all these other elements. This is a global level. And how can we notice that in Latin America? It's first of all similar, but with the higher declared weight in energies that is almost like 40%, but 3/4 of that are energy, metals, and everything related to the advanced manufacture. But in energy, we have a lot of importance, and in the short term, what we can see is that it's going to continue developing, and we are going to see it in all these channels when we are moving oil and other sources of energy, so that we can receive the safety. The investment of the United States and Europe are not going to focus on the energies that are difficult for supply and are not very safe. So if we look at this graph, it's kind of a little bit complex, but we can see the flow of the investment between the regions, and we can see how China, Russia, and are the exporters, and they have spent more outside of their country on the fossil fuel, but Latin America, United States, and Qatar are receiving a lot of investment. So if we compare this flow with what happened in 2015, 2020, in the last 3 years, it has varied and is getting closer and closer. And this is analysis that I like to do. The distance, geopolitical distance of the investment has reduced. So people are investing more and more into countries that are geopolitically closer to them. And if we look at how the investments are moving through all this transition, and we have short-term safety is what we've seen, but if we look in the future, the investment is also moving toward the renewable energies. When we have in Latin America, we are capturing most investment in synthetic and hydro fuels. And finally, last comment, I would like to do more and more investments are mega investments. Historically, in the region, about 20% of the investments were mega investments, over 1 billion declared. And now here we have some examples that are great investments that are going to change the regional future of how the energy is created. Sorry about that. There was one more slide, okay. And finally, I would like to comment, where do these investments come in Latin America, and where do they go? This is which regions are investing, and the big part of the investment is coming into the energy, as you can see here. So this graph in the last 3 years in Latin America had an important decrease in speed, and it's still too early to say that 2025 was a slow year, but the first semester was very slow. And we have to see how our energy future in the future is going to be globally. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Entonces,
thank you. So now we're going to continue with the conversation panel. And for that, I'd like to invite to the stage the moderator, Lucia Spinelli, specialist in energy from the Inter-American Bank of Development. The World Bank, I'm sorry, from the World Bank. I'm sorry, there was a mistake with the script. You can come up.
Y también invito a los panelistas, Eric Tejeda.
I'd also like to invite panelist Eric Tejeda from Honduras, the Secretariat from Honduras.
Desde Paraguay nos acompaña
from Paraguay, Mauricio Bejarano, Minister of Mine and Energy in the Ministry of Public Works and Communication. In Brazil, Leandro Pereira Andrade, Director of the Department of Information Studies and Energy Efficiency of the National Secretariat in Planning in the Ministry of Mines and Energy in Brazil. And also from Belize, Ryan Koch, the Director of Energy Unit in the Public Services Ministry for Energy, Logistics, and Governance.
Hola. Bueno, buenas tardes a todos.
Hello,
Muchas
good
gracias
afternoon, everyone. Thanks to the panel for joining us, and the audience for sticking at this time of the afternoon, you know, second day, and Jaime as well for his presentation, which really opened up a landscape or shared a view of what we're going to discuss. We have representatives from Latin America, and that, as the moderator said, the presenter, they come from different countries. And the idea of the panel is having a discussion on these perspectives and the future of the region with diverse approaches, since we have countries in the South Cone, Paraguay, Central America, Honduras, Brazil, and also Belize. And so that's Latin America, the Caribbean. It's a diverse region. We have different realities. And we try to push this transition and looking at energy sectors that ensure sustainability and also promote energy solidarity. And of course, there's challenges and we see different needs. And I'm really thankful for this panel diversity. So why don't we talk about this and talk about challenges, understanding every approach and knowing that each has their own way of doing things. And so in this context, in of the diagnosis, which Jaime mentioned, now in 50 more years, what we're looking at, the electric demand can be doubled, and there'll be new types of use. And we talk about transportation information and electric mobility coming behind this new use, and how this will generate pressure on electric systems, and also renewables, which are 90% of the generation in some scenarios. And we see, of course, bottlenecks, and we see how we could see some options here. There was a panel in the morning, and we saw the moderation of a panel where these matters were discussed. And so my question, to break the ice, as we say, my question for all of you, these trends that Jaime shared from your approach, what is the ones that you think are most important? And I don't know if you'd like to start, Eric? Yes, I think there's several interesting figures. The participation of the investment flow in the energy sector is quite big. It's over 30%. And also the information shows that energy transition will not happen over morning, because we will have fossil fuels for quite a while, and that's where we see natural gas as an alternative. And I think you've already mentioned this, the transmission, it's important, because some countries in Central America, it seems like they are taking the steps in the right direction, and some are stagnated. And in Honduras, we're trying to develop an important amount of transmission lines, and there's several restrictions, from social matters to the install capacity of companies to develop parallelly to develop different projects and the transmission contracts, and of course financing. And financing is still important, because what we see from multilateral organizations, that's usually a process that is quite complicated, and they last for a while, and that's how things are supposed to be done. But they really make projects last even longer. And I think Central America, with the incorporation of the second circuit of the CEPAC circuit, we will make progress, and we see how things are moving quite slowly, but we need to have political will to move along with planning, with regional transmission, which allows to incorporate new amounts of energy. Thank you, Eric, for that intervention. Leandro, I think he maybe wants to intervene. Yes, if I can respond. Well, first, good afternoon, everyone. And good afternoon to my colleagues in the panel. I'd like to thank you for inviting me and to be part of the panel, and also thank my country for the invitation as a delegate in the experts meeting. Well, I apologize because, as you can see, protect your ears. I will be speaking Portuñol to try to respond to this question, but on this matter, figures are presented in the Brazilian scenarios in the long term that are presented in the design plan, in the national plan. Here we can see something quite similar with a growth of 3.3% with the electric demand, not only due to purification matters, but due to the demand of electric, to the growth of the electric demand, and also because great potential for hydrogen and low carbon, and of course we have many requests for data center access. And in regards to in regards to the 30% of renewables, Brazil has 88, and I think we'll keep those levels. And it's very likely that it will not only happen with hydroelectricals, because these are 50–60% of the matrix of generation in Brazil. We have about 30% of wind generation, photovoltaic generation, and we think that will have a great role. And I think that those are the two aspects that I could respond. Ryan, would you like to share your insight? Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I will speak a bit of Spanglish because that's what we usually speak. In Belize, to be honest, our challenges are the size of the network, and last week we saw that it was 130 megawatts. So trying to bring investment to the country, trying to invest in new generations, it's very difficult to decide on projects. But right now, Belize only has a penetration of about 2% of solar, and we're trying to create new projects, but it's about 80 megawatts. And sometimes that is not very attractive in the private sector. But what makes things a bit difficult is that our prices are relatively low, because we have about 60% of generation of renewables, hydro, and also biomass, and the average cost of energy is 12 cents. And we have an interconnection with Mexico where we use energy, cheap energy, and trying to replace that for new energy. And this is sometimes quite difficult in political matters. It's difficult to tell the audience, okay, now you need to pay more to have better safety, better energy safety. But now we're doing a campaign because last year this happened as well. We saw the vulnerability of depending on other countries, the possibility of not having energy safety in the country. So we have power outages due to the lack of
Y
production
nosotros que
in
no
Mexico,
teníamos
and
suficiente generación dentro del
since we
país,
don't have a lot of
porque
generation in the
teníamos los
country,
centrales, pero estaban
while
fuera de
there's the
mantenimiento.
centrals, they are
Y
not properly
así nosotros estamos
maintained,
viendo
and
ahora cómo reforzar nuestra
now
red
we're
con
seeing how we can
producción
reinforce
solar,
our network
con
with solar
almacenamiento de
production
baterías,
and with battery storage,
escalas, el grid, y
and also with the
nueva
grid
generación a través de
and the
finanzas
new
claras.
generation.
Y también nosotros tenemos otro
And
restricción que
we have
me imagino
another
que es igual
restriction,
como que aquí en Chile,
which
que
I
es que
guess is
nuestra
the same as in
densidad de
Chile. You know,
población
the
es muy
density of
baja en
population is very
comparación a
low
nuestro
in
red de
comparison
distribución
to
y
our
transmisión.
distribution grid and the
Es muy
transmission.
costoso por
And
persona
so it's
las
very
millas de
expensive per
la red de
person
transmisión. Y eso también
for
eleva el costo de
the
electricidad en
transmission
nuestro país.
grid. So that elevates the cost of electricity. Thank you.
Mauricio.
Sí,
Mauricio?
bueno, realmente agradecido con la invitación.
Well,
por
I'm
estar
really
aquí.
thankful for the
Muy contento de
invitation,
compartir acá con los colegas
and
de
I'm happy to
países
share with our
y
colleagues
escuchar un
here,
poquito realidades diferentes, ya que sobre todo en mi
listening to
país
different
tiene unas
realities. And, you know, in my
peculiaridades
country,
casi
there's
únicas.
something quite particular.
Nosotros venimos de
We
tener
come
excedentes
from
energéticos,
having a
lo
surplus of
que
energy,
nos hace reflejar y nos hace
which
apetecible a esto que
means
nos mostraron
that,
con gráficos
you know,
recientemente,
we see
una
these
brillante
graphs
exposición con
and
números
we
y con
see
realidades muy
presentations with
fehacientes,
numbers and
pero
realities
muy
that
alentadoras a
are
la vez.
quite truthful, but you know, they're very
Categóricamente,
encouraging as
nosotros
well.
al tener
And
excedente de energía
categorically,
somos
when having
cautivos y
energy
estamos
surplus, we are careful and
en el ojo de estos grandes
we are
demandadores,
at
los
the
data centers.
eye of,
Y
you know,
no
the data
solamente
centers.
existe un interesado,
And it's
sino
not
que
only
varios.
one person
El pasado
interested, but
año
several.
tuvimos la
And
prueba
last
más
year,
tangible de lo que
we
aconteció
had
parecido al data
the
center y a la
biggest
crisis
proof,
de
you know,
energía,
similar to a data
que ni
center,
más ni menos tuvimos un
which
aumento de demanda 18%.
meant that we had an increase of the in demand of an
18%
18%.
que para cualquier
18%,
sistema eléctrico es una
where for any
barbaridad.
electric system is
Por
huge.
suerte la ANDE estaba
And
consolidada y
luckily,
presta para
this was
aguantar esta gran demanda.
consolidated, and we were
Pero lo
able
cierto y conciso lo que nos
to
muestra la
to
presentación
look at this
es que
and
esto
to
va a
provide
y
this,
que
such
no
a huge
existe
demand.
una
But the
marcha
thing
atrás
is that this is going to
y que
continue increasing, and there's no going
la
back. Therefore,
electrificación masiva,
electrification,
tanto de
massive
movilidad como de
electrification,
otras
mobility,
cuestiones,
and other matters,
como los nuevos consumidores,
such as new
incluido el
consumers,
hidrógeno,
they
nosotros de tener ese
make
excedente, de
us
ser
going from
cautivo
a
o
surplus and being
recibir
careful
visitas en países
and,
del mundo,
you know,
la preocupación se centra cómo nosotros
there's a concern for the future.
sostenemos este aumento de demanda,
How do
que
we
históricamente era
keep
un
this?
promedio del 7%
You know,
anual,
sometimes it
y
was
luego el año
usually
2018
an
estaba
average
18,
of
y que
7%,
creemos que
and
no hay
then
marcha
it
atrás.
went up
Entonces,
18. So
la gran
there's
pregunta que
no
tenemos como
going
gobierno,
back.
como Estado,
So
es decir,
our question
¿cómo
is,
hacemos para sostener?
how
Y
can we
también
maintain this?
vista la presentación que nos
And
hicieron,
looking at that
nosotros nos
presentation,
planteábamos algo por lo cual
we
hasta
were
tuvimos algún tipo de
asking
críticas de decir incorporar
ourselves
gas
a
natural
few
a un
things,
país
and
que
we
es
said,
100%
okay, how do we
renovable.
incorporate the natural
Pero
gas in a country that is
categóricamente somos
100%
conscientes que
renewable? But categorically,
independientemente a que
we
vemos
know
en todas las
that,
proyecciones que
well, we
tenemos que la solar
see
fotovoltaica va a
that
jugar
all
un rol
projections
fundamental
will play
de que
a
las
fundamental
bioenergías en
role,
particular que hoy
and the
tienen van a seguir
bioenergies
jugando un rol
that
más
are today
importante
will
aún.
continue playing an important
Categóricamente se
role, even more
necesita ese gas
important.
natural. Entonces, para
We
nosotros la
need natural
tarea
gas. So
esencial
for
es
us, the
diversificar la
task
matriz de
is
generación.
to
Para
diversify
eso
the
tenemos
generation
que
matters,
hacer
and for
uso
that,
de todos nuestros recursos
we
naturales y
need to use
recursos
all our
naturales
natural
de los
resources
vecinos.
and
Porque acá,
also the
y
ones
se
from
puso
our
mucho
neighbors.
énfasis, se viene poniendo
And
mucho énfasis,
there's
yo
a lot of
celebro eso,
emphasis, and I really
en la
celebrate
integración.
this, the integration.
Categóricamente,
And
el
categorically,
mundo entero,
the
y no voy a
entire
hablar solamente de
world,
nuestra
and I
región,
will
pero
not talk
si nos
about
ceñimos a nuestra
our region
región,
only, but
la muestra tangible de que
the
nosotros necesitamos
tangible
integrar, no es
show,
una necesidad,
what
acá no es
really
una
shows that
deseo,
this is a
es para
need,
poder sostener esta
is so
demanda
that we can
que se está viniendo
sustain
para
the
el futuro.
demand
La transición
that is coming
energética
into the
está muy
future.
bien, todas las
So
queremos, todos la
energy
queremos,
transition
pero
is
ese
great. We all want
consumo
that,
elevadísimo
but
de
that
energía nos
elevated
lleva a todos los
consumption
países
in
a
energy
repensar
that
y
leads
a
all
un repensar
countries to
que nos habla de
consider
utilizar
things
otras
again,
fuentes de
and
generación,
this is
de
about using
hacer
other
uso
sources
del
of
gas natural que
generation
no estaba pensado en nuestro país,
and
de
considering things
incrementar
that were
todas las
not considered
posibilidades de
earlier,
todas
and to
las
increase all possibilities
energías alternativas que tenemos.
and all
Y por otro lado, en nuestro
all
caso
alternatives
tenemos
that
un
we
desafío
had.
más,
And in our case,
que
we
es
have another challenge, which
introducir
is
el capital
introducing
privado dentro
private
del
capital
sector eléctrico
within
para
the
esta
electric
generación,
sector
porque a
for
las muy
that generation, because we have all seen the flow of money that goes away. We see the projection and what is compromised in terms of energy, but we need to look at the conditions as a country so that we can be careful, and so that this investment and these figures can actually work in our country, and for the electric grid can work, because it's not only generation, but we need to make sure we are working and we are moving along. So challenges are very present, and we are working on this, and we know that there's no going back. And so as a nation, we need to provide an effective answer. Thank you. Thank you, Mauricio. Thank you, everyone. And you.
We are going to improvise and continue, and Mauricio, especially when you talk about the uses, when you're talking about providing for the mining, for the electromobility, and also the demand in Paraguay. It's very important and it's very diverse. We had a meeting with the Chilean people, and they were saying how they are managing this and how they're talking about this part of the generation of the renewables, and how we get this higher electricity demand. And each country has their own specific challenges, but here in these different sectors we have the different demands. And Aaron, maybe you would like to comment about these different sectors and the sector, how is this growth of the electric demand in future? In Belize, the tourism is present, and we also have call centers, electromobility, and those are the main reasons that are going to increase our demand. And we are also noticing with the data centers and call centers, even though there are certain politics that are going to get into demand that certain requirements, but right now we can see the increase of the electricity demand and also electrification of certain services, such as for example, as we were like cooking, because we are now looking at different electric stoves and ovens, and the use of the electric buses for the transport between different districts. In case of Brazil, what are the most common uses or risks for this system? First of all, I think it's important to say that in Brazil, that considering large participation of renewable fuels, the preoccupation is the time-based. We have certain moments when we have the access to the system, for example, from Brazil to the region, where we get a part of the load over the southeast, and so the services, the main services that are growing are very often requests for the transition grid, which is quite large, and we have 700,000 kilometers in all these provinces that are interconnected, and the requests of the margin are also important, and they are very large, 1 giga, 2 gigas, and it's important, and they need agile and quick accesses to the transition, because the projects are faster Then the transmission, the evolution of transmission, and we also notice the increase in the temperature demand because, yes, the thermic comfort, because in many services when we have the heat waves, which is becoming a problem for Brazil, because now with the renewables we are going to have variables at the beginning, at the night. We need to be quite flexible operatively with our electrical supplies to supply this demand. And also we have to consider also the natural gas that is important for our matrix, and we have to consider also supply. And the two main services that are increasing demand are the same as in Paraguay: data center and electromobility that is growing in Brazil, but it's slightly less because we have methane and biodiesel solution, which is competitive, so that helps. Mobility demand is now get the energy prices need to be improved to get that more. And Eric, what is the Central America's view on these issues? Some of them, of course, yes. Honduras, especially. Very important data of the growth of the demand. I think that we need to connect the demand with the energy growth. There are certain factors that relate economic growth with the demand growth. For example, this growth is typical because during the Super Niño, we had the growth of 13% when it's usually only 2 to 3%, and it's related with the seasons of the year and also periods of day. Like right now, we have on Friday we had a heat wave of 45 degrees Celsius, and on Monday half of the country was flooded. So we have these climate changes. These models of the demand are constantly being changed. As we look at it in government context, we are planning the economic development. We have to divide country in 4 different development poles, and each one of them has different industries, and that creates this sectionalized demand, and we can plan what kind of energy and how much energy and in which period of time will they need, what is going to be the behavior during the summer or winter, how do I need to expand my distribution grid, especially in Honduras, which is a very dispersed country, and we also have micro networks, and we need microgrids, and we have to integrate it into energy sector, especially with the data center that everybody's mentioning, because they're going to have important participation. We can't be isolated, and we have to integrate the energy development with economic development so that all these issues are seen comprehensively. Thank you very much for your comment, because my next question was about these different tools, and it was exactly related to these issues. How are the countries in the region addressing these issues, these perspectives about the growth of the demand, specific demand, which is especially different in a country that has its generation quite diversified and with more simple systems. So what tools are you using to approach this or to deal with this? As Mauricio was saying, you are incorporating some of the energies in You also have to diversify and try to include other solutions and check all the options that what we are seeing now, and 70% of the renewals in the region. So what are with demand and adapt our systems and create incentives so that this transition occurs and that we can accompany it. Yes, please do. Well, first of all, it's important to mention I've been talking to the Ministry of Industry and Business because the industry in our country only uses 16% of the whole pie chart because most of the consumption is domestic use. So we have to consider industrial area that is directly related to the energy. We have a large challenge that is to industrialize our nation because our country is mostly cattle raising and agricultural country, but we have a point of inflection when we have to build some sectors where we have to decide which industry is going to work with and create some order. And the president of my country, we are providing with a lot of accesses. We have lots of industries that need to be put in different areas, and it's a very large cost. So we have to start with something that is in vogue, and that's hydrogen. We have hydrogen and we want it, but under which conditions? Nobody is going to have anything with 500 megawatt. So even we have very good hydro conditions, we have to consider conditions in which we are categorically want that hydrogen. We have to look for these areas where we can develop these data centers and we can industrialize these areas to increase our GDP, and what we want to increase also what our demand is, then nobody's going to ask for less for 500 megawatt because even the smallest data center needs 500 megawatts. So our basic tools are to say what do we want, how do we want to perform this industrialization, and what kind of industries do we want in our country. And could be that I want crypto mining or not want crypto mining, but in my case, everything gets boiled down to the impact and if my GDP is going to affect my energy consumption. If I don't have GDP that is going to be related, it says that it's not going to be related to these elements, and macroeconomically we're talking it's directly related to the electric production. So we have to be aware. In order to build, we have to decide what, where, and how do we want to build it. Well, before I was the director of the Ministry of the Mining, I was a public company employee, and so this issue is very interesting to me. But in Brazil, we're very interested in these planning instruments. When you consider our hydroenergetic resources, we have always made a lot of effort to provide this electric dispatch, and we have mathematic models, tools, and all the necessary tools for that. And since we have that blackout in 2001, which was a large one, everybody who knows we had to create institutional framework that is going to consider the planning so that we can see those investments necessary for the country so that we can continue and use all these resources in the country. After the blackout, we have created a Brazilian energy efficiency institution, and we have planned it really well. It's also planning of the production, and we also have national energy plans, and we have determining plans that are related to the transmission so that we can optimize the system and all the resources, and especially as energy sector, the companies of the energy planning of the Brazil in this vision is more optimal, and it's the best of all the whole systems, and it's provided a lot of components and raw materials so that we can believe, because our planning is for 10 years ahead of time, because we are going to need flexibility and storage, and it's important to have this, and that's important to have this to create a public debate and to get everybody included. And just last one point, considering this is very important for Brazil that we have international initiatives in these areas. We have a regional commission for the energy planning, and the last year we also created the planning agency and the secretariat that is now growing, and we have a summit. Sorry about my Portuguese, Spanish. We had it in June in Rio de Janeiro. So Brazil is trying to plan for all these, include all these countries so that we can include them. And it's an important area for different transitions because there's not just one unique solution. We have to have specific vision.
I just wanted to reinforce the need of having geopolitics, because symbolism of what used to happen, and I'm sure in other countries it doesn't happen, but the ministries with each other, they would not communicate. They would not communicate with each other. They would not talk about different projects that they had in mind, those that were under development, and they did not think that, for this there's an increase in demand, and they did not know about that. And of course, then they would say, oh, why don't you add 20 megawatts? And, it's an increase in 20%. So how can we complete that? And now with more forums and being able to work in different areas, ministries, private sector, public sector, we've been able to plan in a better way the demands and to have a better generation and to have the flexibility to implement batteries. And what's indispensable is the regional integration, specifically in Central America, because countries are very vulnerable to climate change.
somos vulnerables mayormente a huracanes.
And we are quite vulnerable. And if we have solar plants, we need to look at several plants, and we need to see how much generation there is. And we see that through this pact. And that is something that we could cover. Would you like to add something? Very briefly, I think it's been mentioned in the right manner, because I think when it comes to climate change, we need to consider what happens with each of our countries. In Honduras, we have a critical situation where practically we have exploited about 11% of hydraulic resources. And we have started with 6 dams with over 500 megawatts, but social management is quite complicated. And the behavior of the affluents and the basins and the dams, they have drastic changes in different stations. And so it's not easy to predict. And in Central America, there's lots of penetration of renewable energy, and storage systems, they are a key stakeholder for some, so that energy can be injected at night and at summer where it's needed. So just to wrap up, I wanted to mention that energy storage and looking at how can we integrate renewable energy and how can we make systems more robust, and how countries can generate an interesting policy at a regional level to develop projects, hydroelectric projects that where we have resources, but developing them is not as easy in terms of financing and social management. Thank you. I think several things were mentioned here, because I think this is what Mauricio was saying, and Ryan as well. We're discussing what's the development model of the country, and then there's some words that generate this, and that shows that the sector is related to a lot of things, but it's one thing to say, okay, what's the development model that will push the energy sector as a virtuous cycle, because the model will need a certain amount of energy to work. But the model, in a way, will demand, but will also say what type of offer they want. And when we talk about planning, we're talking about something that has to do with what Brazil and Honduras were saying. How can we manage with the right tools that will allow us to estimate the demand and availability of the offer, something that will incorporate all climate factors and what will allow stakeholders to have the information that they need so that they can do an investment and to have the right answer. We have the daily model dispatch in 3 hours beforehand. In the development model, we actually want what will we do with the energy supply that's available. And in the case of the Caribbean, I understand that for other countries, what happens with tourism, as you're mentioning, Brian, that's a development driver. And So what is the segment that we want for the product to push into demand? What is the quality of service that will be required? So here we see how the sector and difficulties, that's something that we're concerned about, and something that came up and that has to do with this is the hydro. So the region historically, they had installed capacity, and we see that since we see electricity and how things are changing, well, we see what happens in Belize. What are you looking at, and what is the view in the future and in this context? So on one hand, where climate can play a role in terms of fluctuation and things that are for the long term, and where we see a storage role. And so what could actually help in the future, with complex systems and with more diversification? Anyone who wants to start? Yes, I'll start, because currently I think that, currently with the present we see a base generation, and what we're seeing now with climate change is that it's difficult to plan for the entire year. And before, when we were looking at the dry season and rainy season, now we see periods where there's drought, and a week later, the dam is it can no longer take as much water, and so we see the percentages, and we want to see how can we store. And we do have plans of investing more in hydro, because that's fundamental.
Sí. Bueno, es lo que menciona.
Yes, exactly what was being mentioned now. The case of Honduras. We go from last year.
Las represas a filo de agua, por ejemplo, de Pasa.
In Honduras, there's an installed capacity of 240 megawatts, and in summer, we are injecting 2 megawatts. And so the concept that you mentioned, we can talk about availability, and the dams are way below, and what we see with 104 megawatts, that is dry, and at the beginning of May, and that affects all your planning. And so 250, 300 megawatts of hydro are dropped, and then the next year you have a surplus of that basin. Some basins, and we have the evaporation rate that's been quite strong, and that's due to climate change. I'm sorry, according to the capacity net potential of about 300 megawatts, and now we see that it's 150,000. 150 megawatts. So in 12 years, we lost the evaporation rates. It does not rain that much, or at least for less time, but when it rains, it's more, it's a bigger amount, it's more intense. So there's more cubic millimeters in rain, especially in very special areas and very focused areas. So this is something we're still discussing, but it's difficult to predict when working in these. And we also look at the private sector, and once we have
no puede costear
we
todo
see
eso.
how
Entonces,
that we can
generar modelos de
pay for
negocio que
it.
también sean
So,
atractivos
of
para
course,
el
we need
sector
to make
privado,
sure
pero que tampoco
that
entregues
we
recursos naturales
provide
y
incentives
que
that are attractive for the
los
private sector, but you
privatices
cannot provide
absolutamente.
your natural resources
Es
and
algo con que
make
los
them
estados,
private. So
hablando de estados que tengan cierta
we
fortaleza,
are talking
pero
about
debe generar mecanismos para lidiar
governments that
con
are
ese tema. Yo
somewhat
pienso
strong, and you need
que
to have the mechanisms
debido
to
a
deal with
la
that matter.
ingente
And I
cantidad
think
de
that due
recursos
to the
hídricos en
amount
toda
of
la región,
hydraulic resources that are needed in the region,
va a seguir siendo un motor
this is going
importante.
to continue
También
being
en
an
su fase de
important
almacenamiento también que va a
engine,
ser
and
importante y va a ser futuro,
this is going
pero
to be
siempre
part of
estamos
the
viendo el
future,
retorno
and we're
y su
always
eficacia, el tema del
looking
cambio climático,
at
que
climate
ríos
change, the basins that are going to dry out.
Bueno, yo la pregunta es, ¿qué rol se le va a
The question is, what's the role
y es fundamental
when the Energy Week was closed last year? We did that in Itaipu, and when we did that in Itaipu, we called that the relaunch of the hydro, because for a while it was considered something negative. Well, it's there's no use in talking about that here, but that's negative, and we see what happens. What happened in Itaipu, we all went there, and we have pushed again this type of generation, which was not very strong in the last few years. So what we want is not only working with internal rivers we have a new bill, and we want for the private capital, which we believe that exists, we want that to come in, and it's true, creating the legal conditions and commercial conditions for that to happen. That's an important task, and we're working on it. And on the other hand, and talking about climate change, we have been advised and we've received help, and we have studied the basin in the Paraná River, and that is a very important resource. That's where Itaipu is, and there's the possibility for other centrals. And based on this change that is happening, we have seen and we have received information where the water volumes will increase, they will be intense, they will be big, but the drought time will be as well. So the management of water for construction is very different from before. So we do want to add that to the next centrals, and Itapicora, Corpus Christi, and the other machines. And yes, we want that, and that's why we try to do this. And while it's not free agreements, and what was mentioned, we see the social resistance, and that resistance is something that we need to consider, understanding what we have in front of us and what led us to this debate. The huge energy demand, the entire world is it's something that we'll all face. So we need to eradicate any type of fanaticism, and we need to understand that we need to manage all natural resources in a responsible manner. But I do think we need to develop all centrals we can so that we can assist this huge demand.
That's a very complex question to continue, and especially for the short time we have here. But I'll try to reply as best as I can. So we need to talk about these issues. We first of all have to talk about the operation of the hydroelectric plants. We have been studying and investigating different defects of the climate change and the reasons of the water in different areas, because historical is not the same as what we can see nowadays. So we have to find out how we can operate based on what we have and how we can use these waters in the dams. And we have to consider the rest of the electric grid in Brazil, and we have to consider, or they have to be higher, where we have to have more water, and to understand the needs of the maximal demand of the system. And we need also those elements of the energy. And so the use of hydroelectrics in Brazil is very seasonal, and now we are trying to get more water for the dry period of time when we have less rain, so that we can use that something that is going to help also the generation of electricity with the wind, etc., to complement that. And those are the parts of the studies that are very intense and depend on the validation of the control of different operations of dams, and so it's a different that we can make the best in Brazil, and view of the expense, which also important to make here in Brazil. We have unexplored potential of our grid in the north of the country, in Amazonia, other areas, but environmental issues and people's communities, the new challenge regarding the climate change variable. We have to consider the projects need to be
Recording in progress. Gas, Mauricio habló del tema, Eric también, bueno, todos creo que hablaron un poco la misma pregunta que con el caso hídrico, pero para el cumpliría, o cuál es, digamos, en la planificación y de un rol para la demanda y para abastecer esta demanda en un de transición, en un contexto de nuevas demandas que van surgiendo, cómo, digamos, cuál es el rol que están pensando y cómo están pensando que eso, qué rol debe cumplir el gas y cómo se incorporaría a los sistemas, si ya no está, como es el caso de Paraguay, o si ya está, es el rol que creen que va a ser menor, mayor, puntual, la...
Bueno, actualmente la de energía de Sudamérica rondará los 10.000 metros. Hay países que ya tienen instalaciones de gas natural. Panamá tiene una importante con gas. Y podrán rondar los 1.300 metros. O sea, en Centroamérica habrá un 14% de penetración natural. Y en Honduras todavía no ha ingresado. Nosotros, en esta administración, ya se firmó un contrato de gas natural que tuvo una etapa diésel y hasta ahora va a entrar en gas natural, ¿no? Nosotros estamos en un proceso de licitación de 1.500 megawatts. Detectamos que hay mucho apetito por compañías extranjeras y por clúster de compañías que ya tienen la cadena de suministro muy bien diagramada, de llevar a Honduras y al Triángulo Norte más gas natural, ¿no? como lo mencionaban los datos, a nuestro juicio va a jugar un rol ser más tiempo en los mercados energéticos de lo que realmente nos gustaría aceptar, ¿no? Hay un tema que es fundamental para el caso de Honduras y es que suele suceder en los países pequeños, ¿no? Como los nuestros, donde hay ciertos grupos económicos que tienen un poder de mercado fuerte y ejercen boicot, que es el caso de Honduras, para el ingreso del gas natural, porque la matriz térmica está concentrada en búnker, ¿no? Ese es uno de los retos que nosotros estamos superando, ¿no? Digamos, sustituir una matriz que el 90% de lo térmico es búnker por el gas natural, ¿no? Pero que son grupos económicos con un poder de mercado fuerte y que es una transición no tan fácil de hacer y que además tiene costos políticos, ¿no? Porque hay grupos que tienen también medios de comunicación y generan ambientes adversos, se politizan temas y no se ve desde la perspectiva objetiva. En el caso de ingreso de gas natural, que para Honduras es un gran paso y que yo soy de la idea que el Triángulo Norte y en general Centroamérica, ese 14% va a ir avanzando a mayor presencia de gas natural en la región.
Nada más quería seguir eso, que Belice es muy parecido. No hay gas natural o generación de gas natural, en un caso como con Honduras, en Roatán, si no me equivoco. Sí tenemos planes para ver cómo incorporamos el gas natural reemplazando, en nuestro caso, simplemente diésel, que tenemos turbinas de gas ahorita operando en diésel. Pero los inversores quieren una generación de anclaje de nada menos de 200 a 500 megawatts. Ya supera toda la demanda pico del país, así no es posible. Así estamos viendo para ver esa hora interconexión regional, para ver cómo podemos ver si interconectamos con Honduras a través de CEPAC o Guatemala, cuando ellos tienen mayor generación de gas natural a cantidades mayores, que viene más económicamente factible para exportar ya a Belice, o al revés, a través con nuestra producción solar o algo así.
Bien, en Brasil el gas natural es muy importante. Tenemos una demanda muy grande. Está estable hace unos años, pero es muy importante. Tenemos un potencial adormecido muy fuerte de demanda en el sector industrial. En el sector eléctrico, el gas natural tiene un rol complementar. Entonces, las proyecciones son que van a desempeñar un papel relevante en lo atendimiento a punta
in the part, and also to provide the flexibility of the system, especially when our photovoltaic generation goes lower during the day, but the natural gas is so we can then consider and increase the presence of the natural gas, and we need the good prices in our country. It could be the price of the natural gas, and Brazil is a big producer of the oil, and we also have associated gas production because we are seventh producer in the world, and now it's quite on the offshore, so we need to bring it to our shore, and we also have to validate the regional exchange with, for example, Argentina, Paraguay, and there are things that we are having in discussion, and also the integration, regional integration. But we have natural gas as an important fuel for the transition and for the continuity of lower emission, and so we don't use other fuel like diesel or oil, etc. So we have biofuels that are also growing. We have biomethane that is also growing in the southeast region, and it has a good future of competing. The gas is very important for the industry and our, especially for our industry. And us, we have constituted what we consider which is this work, because we are very attached to the natural gas for the electricity and for the industry. And something that was a project that was not considered so much for the future, because Brazil is a large market. They get 700 million cubic meters per day, and they project 150 million of cubic meters per day. We need to consider that we're just going to be the path for this gas, but right now, within the same OLADE, we have this presence with Mercosur and Chile. We are connecting two oceans, and we are also considering this agreement between Brazil and Argentina, where we confirm offer and demand, what's necessary, and if we have the access of natural gas, and that's where Paraguay will join, and they also consider electrical energy to maintain this, and so that we can maintain these alternatives, and we can continue working with them. And then we have industries that are not being developed because we don't have energy production, so that's our incentive. We have natural gas in our subsoil, so the market was not needing it in the past, but now with the Brazilian market, we could increase the possibility of the exploitation of this natural gas, and we are also very expectant of the natural gas that is present, and we saw it in every projection of the energy transition. We also have Argentina that has 150 years of reserves. We also have a large customer such as Brazil, and we just have to seize the opportunity and generate a good development area, so because we have large demand in the world, and we are considering also nuclear self-generation, because they don't have a place for their investment for the generation. So we have this opportunity where we can see the need, and we also know for sure that the natural gas is going to be important for the development of this. And just one aspect of the gas integration is that it's very important to highlight this. We have to have more confidence. We have to be more reliable so that we can guarantee the volumes of all these elements, because otherwise we cannot work with that. So we have, for example, Taikoo Treaty, where we have to have something similar so that the gas can continue.
Thank you, Leandro, and you have allowed me to now get to the closure and from the regional perspective, and the importance on dialogue in instances like this for conversation. And we see what happens with the Taipei Treaty. And it's important to provide an answer to the demand and to have systems that are robust and sustainable. It's important to understand what's happening, dialoguing between countries, thinking and planning, considering systems, developing the interconnections. And we know that they exist, and we should not only try to wrap things up very quickly. So we need to optimize, and we need to keep into account its existence, whether for electric connection and with different functions. And for any instance, in this discussion and this type of events and conversations and data, that really contributes, and we hope we can continue contributing in that role. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Gracias a todos. Los invito a colocarse para una
Thank you. You're all invited to join us for a final group photo. And meanwhile, I'd like to share two announcements with the audience. First, in 5 minutes at 5:30, in the same room, we'll have the award ceremony of the ULADA Awards for Energy Excellence. So please stick around in the room. We'll have I think she said meeting in the Hotel DoubleTree, and we'll have some buses that will take you there at 7:30 from the entrance hotel. So once again, you're all invited to a cocktail at DoubleTree Hotel Vitacura at 7 and 7:30. You will have a bus that will take you there. And so that is it for this panel. And in a few minutes, we'll have the award ceremony. Don't miss it.